The history of ITV, the United Kingdom Independent Television Commercial Network, goes back to 1954. Today, the ITV network is split between three owners: ITV PLC, STV Group and UTV Media. Formation. The ITV network came about as a result of the Television Act 1954, which paved the way for the establishment of a commercial television service in the UK and created the Independent Television Authority. The Act itself was not without controversy, and much debate ensued both in the British Parliament and the British press, and it was passed on the basis that the ITA would regulate the news service and ensure that the news service did not follow the same path taken by American television networks. For example, it was made obligatory that commercials be clearly distinguishable from programs. At the time, American shows were normally sponsored by a single company, so it was not uncommon for a game show host to step away from his podium after a round to sell cars or the Flintstones to segue into an ad for cigarettes with no perceived change from show to advert. The new independent television network, named due to its independence from the BBC, who had a monopoly on broadcasting in the UK, was made up of numerous companies providing a regional television service and would also generally provide programmes to the network as a whole. Each individual company broadcast on 405-line VHF and was responsible for providing a local service, including daily news bulletins and local documentaries, and for selling advertising space on their channel. This measure ensured that all the ITV companies were in competition with each other and that no single broadcaster could gain a monopoly over commercial broadcasting. However, national news was not provided by the individual companies and is instead provided by Independent Television News. Each regional service had its own on-screen identity to distinguish it from other regions, since there was often a sizable overlap in reception capability within each region. Upon the creation of the network, 6 franchises were awarded for London, the Midlands and the North of England, with separate franchises for weekdays and the weekends. The companies in these regions were known as the Big Four and consisted of Associated Rediffusion, ATV, Granada and ABC. These companies were generally the best known and provided the most network output. The first ITV contractor to begin broadcasting was the London weekday contractor Associated Rediffusion, on September 22, 1955, beginning at 1915 local time. On the first night of telecasts, the BBC, who had held the monopoly on broadcasting in Britain, aired a melodramatic episode of their popular radio soap opera The Archers on the BBC Home Service. In the episode, core character Grace Archer was fatally injured in a fire, and it was seen as a ploy to keep loyal viewers and listeners away from the news station. The first full day of transmissions was September 23, 1955, when Britain's first female newsreader Barbara Mandel appeared. The London weekend contractor ATV launched 2 days later. The other franchises launched within a year of the London launch, and other contracts were awarded by the ITA between 1956 and 1961. All the franchises launched by September 1962. ITV was admitted as an active member of the European Broadcasting Union through the Independent Television Companies Association Limited, together with the Independent Television Authority, in 1959. 1964 Euro 1968. In 1963 the ITA chairman, Lord Hill of Luton, initiated a review of all the ITV companies following the release of the Pilkington Report, which saw the launch of BBC Two and heavily criticised ITV. This review would review a company's performance, and either grant them an extension to their service licence or replace the company with another in that region. This process was repeated frequently throughout the early life of ITV and lasted approximately 10 years. Reviews like this also ensured that the companies maintained their high performance by maintaining the possibility of the loss of their licence. The new licenses also included clauses which took into account the promised ITV2 UHF channel, promised to be launched if the Conservative Party won the 1964 general election. Despite the review, no company lost its position as the local ITV contractor for their region, and all licenses were extended for another 3 years, although several of the major companies were instructed to strengthen the regional emphasis of their on-screen identities. The only change to the network was the formation of a single Wales and West franchise, operated by TWW, following the collapse of WWN and its subsequent takeover by TWW. WWN ran into trouble when it had problems with the construction of its transmitter network, as well as strict provisions in its contract to produce a large amount of Welsh-language programming. This meant that WWN lost a lot of money and, despite some help from other ITV companies, it declared itself bankrupt in January 1964, the only ITV company to have ever done so. Overall, the regional companies made a profit within the first few years of their existence. The largest regions especially so. Roy Thomson, the Canadian founding chairman of Scottish Television, famously described the ownership of an ITV franchise as a license to print money. 1968 to 1974. Another franchise review was called by the ITA in 1967, for contracts running from the end of July 1968, that was to drastically change the structure of ITV itself. The review aimed to ensure that the ITV system was ready for the impending arrival of colour broadcasting, and also to again allow for the potential start of ITV2, should the Conservatives win any election held after 1970. The behaviour of some of the companies only reinforced the ITA's assumptions of arrogance following the few changes in the last franchise round. Rediffusion London's department managers also popped up in similar roles for rival applications, and TWW reapplied for their contract under both their own name and that of WWN Teal'c Cymru as a tax dodge. As a result, Lords Hill had made it clear in 1966 that all bets were off on the next franchise round and that the regions themselves may change. Therefore, in the period between the interviews of each applicant and the announcement of the changes, the newspapers speculated wildly about the likely changes. Suggestions were made of Scottish Television exiting the system, Rediffusion moving to replace Southern, and various other wild ideas. In the end, the changes made to the ITV regions were as follows: the weekend franchises in the north of England and the Midlands were abolished. The North of England region was split into two new smaller regions, the North West and Yorkshire. 7-day contracts were specified in both these new regions, as well as in the Midlands. Separate weekday and weekend franchises continued in London. However, the handover time was moved from the beginning of Saturday to Friday at 7 p.m. The ITV companies themselves changed considerably. Some merely had their contracts changed, while others were replaced altogether by new companies. The changes were as follows. TWW controversially lost the Wales and West of England franchise to a new company, Highleach Television. Unhappy with the development, TWW ceased broadcasting on March 4, 1968, nearly 5 months before its contract was due to expire, with the ITA providing an interim service until Highleach took over on May 20. ATV lost the London Weekend franchise to a consortium led by David Frost, called the London Television Consortium, which was soon renamed London Weekend Television. It had been expected that ABC would take over this franchise. ATV was awarded the 7-day contract for the Midlands region, replacing ABC at the weekends. Granada was awarded the 7-day contract for the new North West region. 2 consortia applied for the new Yorkshire region, Telefusion Yorkshire and Yorkshire Independent Television. The region was awarded to Telefusion, on the basis that it merged with Yorkshire Independent. The merged company took the name Yorkshire Television. Rediffusion and ABC were asked to form a joint company for the London weekday franchise, in an attempt by the ITA to keep ABC in the network. This company, Thames Television, was controlled by ABC, who owned 51% while Rediffusion owned 49%. Roy Thomson, now Baron Thomson of Fleet, was required to divest himself of most of his holding in Scottish Television. In addition, the Independent Television Publications Company was formed to produce a national ITV programme listings magazine. This magazine was called The Times, originally the title of the London Listings magazine. It replaced all of the regional magazines, except the Channel Islands publication. Before the changes were implemented, however, Harold Wilson appointed Lord Hill as chairman of the BBC Board of Governors and replaced him with Herbert Bowden, also known as Lord Aylestone. He reviewed the changes Hill had made, but allowed them to stand. 1968 strike. The implementation of the ITV changes led to industrial unrest in the companies. Although there were no job losses in the system this was an ITA stipulation people were forced to move from Manchester and Birmingham to Leeds, from London to Cardiff and, perhaps less troublesome, from one part of London to another. Many staff stayed in the same jobs in the same locations, but now had a different employer. Since this meant that staff were being made redundant, the unions required redundancy payments. However, these payments led to problems in staff not receiving them, who were changing company but not location, as in the case of the Teddington studios. The unions asked for payments to be made in those cases. The companies responded by drawing the line, and wildcat strikes broke out in the weeks before and after the changes came into effect. By the Friday, after the changes, a mixture of strike action and management lockouts had taken ITV off the air, and for most of August 1968 the regional network was replaced with an ITV emergency national service run by management. By September 1968, with both sides claiming victory, all workers had returned to work. However, memory of this strike would cause more industrial unrest in the decades that followed. Post-strike and colour television, this era also saw the introduction of colour television to the network and the introduction of the new 625-line system. During the 1960s, some commercial companies proposed the introduction of colour on the 405-line system, but the General Post Office insisted that colour should wait until the higher-definition 625-line UHF system became standard. ITV eventually introduced PAL colour on this system from November 15, 1969, simultaneous with BBC One and 2 years after BBC Two. This did not, however, spread immediately across the UK. Some regions had to wait a few more years before colour was available. This was primarily due to the cost incurred in purchasing new recording and broadcast equipment and the subsequent studio upgrade that usually accompanied it. Colour strike, November 13, 1970 to February 8, 1971. The colour strike was an industrial action by technicians at all ITV companies from November 13, 1970 to February 8, 1971 who, due to a pay dispute with their management, refused to work with colour television equipment. Post-colour strike, colour was available to nearly 100% of the UK from 1976, with the Channel Islands being the last region to be converted. This enabled the 405-line system to be phased out between 1982 and 1985. 1974 1982, before the 1979 dispute. Following the passing of the Sound Broadcasting Act 1972, the ITA was abolished and replaced with the Independent Broadcasting Authority who took on the same role as the ITA but were also in charge of the then new independent local radio stations. The next franchise round in 1974 produced no changes in contractors, as the huge cost in switching to colour television would have made the companies unable to compete against rivals in a franchise battle. It also allowed the companies to recoup the cost and to return to normal service. Some slight changes were made to the Yorkshire franchise area however, as the Belmont transmitter in Lincolnshire switched from Anglia to Yorkshire, boosting the broadcast area. Also the Bilsdale UHF transmitter, based on the border between Yorkshire and Tyne Tees and much disputed over, was assigned to Tyne Tees. The IBA during this period allowed Yorkshire and Tyne Tees Television to consolidate slightly into a new venture, Trident Television. Trident originally managed advertising sales for Tyne Tees and Yorkshire but was allowed a reverse takeover of both companies. Tyne Tees and Yorkshire did however retain their own studio bases, management, boards and on-screen identity. Launch of Oracle Teletext. This period also saw the launch of the Oracle Teletext service. It was officially launched in 1978, a few years after the launch of the BBC's CFAX service and offered news and information delivered through the remaining lines of information in the television transmission. the service began to see improved takings following a heavy promotional campaign using the slogan "Page the Oracle" and the inclusion of the software as standard in most new television sets at the beginning of the 1980s. 1979 dispute. Possibly one of the most notable events for ITV during this period was a 10-week industrial dispute in 1979, which led to the subsequent shutdown of almost all ITV broadcasts and productions. Trouble first occurred at London's Thames Television when electricians refused to accept, what they considered, a derisory pay increase. Management attempted to operate a normal service but other transmission staff refused to cooperate. When Thames management ordered the striking staff to return or else the broadcasting union ACTT instructed members at 13 other ITV stations to walk out in support. The only company unaffected was Channel Television. The unions realized action they could force the station out of business as it was so small. Viewers were greeted with blank television screens on the morning of August 10, 1979, and were left without regular programs, most importantly the highly rated soap opera Coronation Street as well as various sporting events. Post-1979 strike, the strike ended with victory for the unions in a dispute estimated to have cost the companies £100 million in lost revenue. Programming resumed at 5:38 p.m. on October 24, 1979. Returning viewers were greeted with a new jingle, "Welcome Home to ITV," sung by the Mike Sam Singers. When the strike ended, ITV had the daunting task of luring back viewers from the BBC. This proved difficult as production of original programming had stopped and wouldn't even be available for several months. ITV therefore suffered in the ratings at the hands of the BBC. 2.5 months after ITV began broadcasting again, it was finally ready to air additional original programming and viewers began switching back. This strike was to be the last major strike for ITV as the power of the broadcasting unions began to wane, even though minor disputes plagued the television industry in the 1980s. The dispute was the longest in the history of British television. 1982 to 1993. At the end of 1980, the IBA announced it would be reviewing the ITV broadcasting licenses again, for contracts beginning on January 1, 1982. A few changes were made to the ITV structure, with the creation of dual regions for Wales and the West, the South and South East and the East and West Midlands. These regions were created following the push for more regional news. The company operating these regions had to provide a regional news service for both regions and provide studio facilities in both areas. The franchise round concluded with the following changes: ATV was re-awarded its contract for the dual Midlands region, but was considered by the IBA to have not focused on the region enough. As a result, changes were ordered including the diluting of existing shareholdings, greater production facilities in the contract area and the sale of Elstree Studios. To emphasize these actions, the company was told to rename itself. It settled on the name Central Independent Television. Southern Television lost its license for the South of England, in favour of Television South. Westward Television also lost its license for South West England, being replaced by Television South West. TSW ended up taking over Westward in August 1981, but continued to use the Westward name until January 1, 1982. The new nationwide breakfast television service was awarded to TVAM. Trident Television was ordered to sell the majority of its holdings in Yorkshire and Tyne Tees, and the two companies became independent of each other again. The Bluebell Hill transmitter in Kent was transferred from Thames LWT to TVS, to increase the size of TVS's southeast sub-region. This period saw the ITV companies, and the BBC, expand their services further into the day than ever before. A large part of this was a result of the franchising of a breakfast service in 1980. TVM was awarded this contract and given a provisional start date of May 1983. There had been other programs previously, most notably Yorkshire's Good Morning Calendar, which had shown that the public were interested in a breakfast service. As a result, TVM and the BBC rushed their own services to the air. TVM would broadcast between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9:25 am every morning. The somewhat obscure 9.25 close time came about in order to allow time to switch transmitters from the breakfast broadcaster over to the regional ITV stations. Today this transition is seamless, though the anomaly remains. TVM launched as a serious news program on February 1, 1983. However, it changed its format soon after to attempt to copy the success of the BBC's breakfast time. Another expansion came in 1987 when ITV's schools programming was transferred to Channel 4, freeing up a large section of the daytime schedule for news shows. This expansion in programming, and in advertising time, helped give the stations a boost. At around the same time, the companies began to move into nighttime broadcasting. This began with individual efforts by individual companies, primarily the Big Five, before collaborative efforts resulted in the whole network operating 24 hours a day by the end of 1988. Notable efforts included Granada's Nighttime, LWT's Night Network, TVS's Late Night Late and HTV's Night Club. Later efforts included ITV Nighttime from Thames and LWT in Night Shift from Yorkshire and Tyne-Tees. Channel 4 had launched on November 2, 1982. Originally, it built on the ITV network for its funding, whereby the ITV companies sold Channel 4's airtime. This arrangement ended on December 31, 1992, after which a funding formula continued, whereby the ITV companies would subsidize Channel 4 if it fell into the red. However, it never did, and the funding formula was withdrawn in 1998. During the 16-year period, Channel 4 and ITV would regularly cross-promote each other's programming, free of charge. ITV introduced its first official corporate logo and national on-air identity in September 1989. This was an attempt to unify the network under one image while still allowing for regional identity. However, 6 companies refused to use their versions of the generic ident, preferring to stick with their distinctive on-screen branding. The companies to use the generic ident for the longest time were Yorkshire, who kept it on until October 1994, and Grampian, who continued to use it right up until ITV's second corporate logo was introduced in 1998. Another new venture was the ITV Telethon. This event, held in 1988, 1990 and 1992, saw the regional companies in the national network come together to raise money for charity. The 27-hour telethons were suspended following the change of culture at ITV following the franchise changes in 1993. The Broadcasting Act of 1990. Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government spent much of the 1980s privatising and deregulating British industry, and commercial broadcasting was no exception. The Broadcasting Act 1990 paved the way for the deregulation of the British commercial broadcasting industry, which was to have many consequences for the ITV system. As a result of this act, the Independent Broadcasting Authority was abolished, and replaced by 2 new light touch regulators, the Independent Television Commission and the Radio Authority. The Small Cable Authority was also abolished, its powers transferred to the ITC. The Act also changed the system of license allocation for the franchises now legally known as Channel 3, the previous system where applicants needed to show good programming ideas and fine financial controls was replaced by highest bidder auctions to determine the winner of each ITV regional franchise. This element of the ITV franchising process was very controversial. The press and the existing ITV companies lobbied to have it changed, and the ITC agreed to introduce a quality threshold to prevent high bidders with poor program plans from joining the system. Another safeguard was the business plan, which determined if a bidder could maintain the payments due and still retain money for program making. Other changes were also made as part of the Act. ITN, the news provider for ITV, was no longer to be exclusively owned by ITV companies. Additionally, Channel 4, which had previously been an independent subsidiary of the IBA, was now to become a government-owned corporation, patterned after the BBC. It would also begin to sell its own advertising, a function previously provided by each ITV company as a return for subsidizing the channel. One further change in the 1990 Act related to the way the ITV networking system was run. Since the 1960s, The Independent Television Companies Association's Program Controllers Committee, representing the Big Five network companies, had decided which programs had aired in network program time slots. This had the effect of excluding smaller ITV companies, as well as independent production companies. Following lobbying by independent producers and TVS, the Act required that ITV's scheduling be performed by a nominated person independent of the regional companies, and that a 25% threshold of independent production be required. This led to the creation in 1992 of the ITV Network Centre, a central body in charge of the network schedule, with, for the first time, a single ITV Director of Programming. 1993 2002, 1991 ITV franchise auctions. Following the changes laid out in the Broadcasting Act 1990, a franchise round was announced by the ITC in 1991 for licenses beginning January 1, 1993. A number of companies bid for the licenses, including. As a direct result of the franchise bid, TSW lost the South West of England franchise to West Country Television. Thames Television controversially lost the London weekday franchise to Carlton Television. However, Thames continued to produce programs for ITV and other channels, such as The Bill and most recently the successful reality television programs Pop Idol and The X Factor. TVS lost the South of England franchise to Meridian Broadcasting. TVM lost the national breakfast television franchise to Sunrise Television, which changed its name to GMTV before launch because of a dispute with BSKYB over the name Sunrise. Oracle lost the national teletext franchise to Teletext Limited. All other existing ITV companies retained their regional franchises. Due to their bids being barred on business plan grounds and therefore deemed too high, TSW and TVS attempted to obtain a judicial review of the ITC's decisions, and of the wording of the 1990 Act. Accordingly, the ITC held off awarding the contract to West Country until the review was completed. As the contract with Meridian had already been agreed, the court felt unable to conduct a review of that decision. The review of the Southwest franchise process took several months, but was decided in favor of the ITC. The relaxation in the franchise ownership rules, as a result of the 1990 Act, meant that mergers between ITV companies were now possible. This was further enhanced by the passing of the Broadcasting Act 1996, which relaxed the rules even further. As a result, companies began to take each other over to increase efficiencies and to expand. In 1992, Yorkshire and Tyne Tees merged again, creating Yorkshire Tyne Tees Television plc. The two companies were permitted to merge before their existing arrangements expired in June 1992, due to the marginal nature of both companies' finances, and a need to rationalize the two companies before the franchise handover date. Takeovers began in earnest in 1994, as Carlton took over Central, having held a stake in the company since 1987. Granada bought LWT in a hostile bid, and MAI, owners of Meridian Broadcasting, took over Anglia Television. As a result of the latter, Anglia's presentation and playout facilities were moved to Meridian's base in Southampton. In 1996, Carlton bought West Country Television and increased its stake in Central to 81%. Then, in 1997, Granada acquired Yorkshire Tyne Tees Television and moved the presentation and playout of Granada, Yorkshire and Tyne Tees to the Leeds studios, while Scottish Media Group, which owned Scottish Television, acquired Grampian Television and began to consolidate staff at its studio base in Glasgow. Also in 1997, United News and Media, the evolution of MAI and owner of Meridian in Anglia, purchased HTV. However, few departments were consolidated. 1998 to 2002, by 1999, four groups owned the majority of the ITV franchises: Granada, Carlton, United News and Media and the Scottish Media Group, with UTV, Channel Television and Border Television remaining independent. From here, the companies further consolidated their channels. In November 1999, a new, Hearts based on Air look was introduced and adopted by the Granada and UNM regions, along with Border and Channel. This look reduced regional identity to a design. At the conclusion of the ident, the majority of the ident was generic to all the stations. 2 months before, in September 1999, Carlton dropped the Central and West Country names from their on-air presentation, instead branding these regions as Carlton, and using the same presentation for all 3 regions. In the summer of 2000, following an unsuccessful attempt to merge with Carlton, UNM sold its 3 stations, Meridian, Anglia and HTV, to Granada. However, Granada had to sell the broadcasting arm of HTV to Carlton to comply with the then current regulatory requirements. In July 2001, Granada acquired Border from Capital Radio Group and moved presentation and playout facilities to Leeds. In addition to franchise mergers, in 1998 the Independent Television Association and Network Centre formally merged, becoming ITV Network Limited. At the same time, a new lowercase ITV Network logo was introduced at the same time for use around the network. The new logo design was meant to appear friendlier to the viewer. Throughout this period, the ITV companies sought to expand into the new, multi-channel environment forming in the UK. In October 1996, Granada launched 4 channels through a joint venture with BSKYB entitled Granada Sky Broadcasting. These 4 channels, Granada Plus, Granada Good Life, Granada Men and Motors and Granada Talk TV, respectively focused on repeated entertainment programming from the Granada archives, women's lifestyle programming for men and televised interactive debating. Granada Talk TV closed down in August 1997 after only 10 months on air due to low viewership, while Granada Good Life rebranded to Granada Breeze in May 1998. In September 1996 Carlton launched Carlton Food Network, a cookery channel, and in November 1996 a joint venture between Scottish and BSKYB was launched, entitled Sky Scottish, and aimed mainly at Scots who lived outside of Scotland. While Sky Scottish closed in May 1998 due to low viewership, Carlton expanded its channels, launching Carlton Select in February 1997 followed by Carlton Cinema, Carlton Kids and Carlton World in November 1998. However, all but Carlton Cinema closed shortly into the new millennium, mainly due to low viewership and cost-cutting in light of the cost of funding on digital. Despite these larger companies having launched their own services a few years previously, Granada, Carlton and UNM collaborated to launch a new service in December 1998, ITV2. The new channel expanded network ITV programs and launched on multiple services, giving additional appeal to the style of ITV itself in light of new competition from channels operating on satellite, cable and more recently digital terrestrial television. However, ITV2 only launched in England and Wales, leaving SMG, UTV and Channel to use the multiplex space in their respective regions to whatever purpose they saw fit. As a result, SMG launched S2 in April 1999 and UTV launched TVU in June 1999, both offering similar programming tailored for their region. By January 2002, however, both channels had ceased and were replaced by ITV2 itself. In August 2000 ITN, the news producer for the ITV network, launched the ITN News channel which provided rolling news on cable, satellite and digital terrestrial. Following the increase in ITV-branded channels and services, including ITV2 and ITV Digital, the decision was taken by Carlton and Granada to rename the ITV network in their regions as ITV1 in August 2001. Another venture initiated by Carlton and Granada was jointly bidding for the newly created DTT license. The companies jointly bid with BSKYB for the license under the company name British Digital Broadcasting and won. However, BSKYB was forced to withdraw following competition laws. Carlton and Granada launched the service in November 1998 as On Digital, and ran the service that housed other free-to-air channels. However, BSKYB had launched its own service, Sky Digital, the previous month and following a heavy promotional campaign by Sky, which compared the Sky Digital service to On Digital's service and always to Sky's benefit, On Digital started making heavy losses. In a resort to keep the venture afloat, Carlton and Granada used the name of ITV to boost the success of the company. The newly named ITV Digital launched in July 2001, complete with an expensive advertising campaign featuring Owl and Monkey, and an exclusive deal to air the Football League on the newly created ITV Sport channel. However, the venture was still not bringing the results required, and ITV Digital went into administration in March 2002, with the ITV Sport channel closing 2 months later. This led to criticism of Carlton and Granada from SMG, UTV and Channel, which objected to the ITV name being reduced following the collapse of the service. 2002 Euro present, 2002 to 2005. From 2002, the ITV network began to consolidate again. On October 28, 2002, the Carlton and Granada regions adopted a new presentation package featuring the network's celebrities, which resulted in the regions becoming known as ITV1 at all times, the region names only appearing prior to regional programs. This look also marked the centralization of continuity in the Carlton and Granada regions to London, with the exception of Wales. The pinnacle of ITV's consolidation was the merger of Carlton and Granada in 2004. The two companies had previously tried to merge twice before in the 1990s. However, the government and competition laws prevented this from occurring. But in October 2003, the government announced that it would no longer prevent a merger from taking place, subject to safeguards being set in place to ensure the continued independence of SMG, UTV and Channel Television. Carlton and Granada finally merged at the end of January 2004, with Granada shareholders owning 68% of the new company, ITV PLC, and Carlton shareholders owning the remaining 32%. ITV PLC was floated on the London Stock Exchange under the symbol ITV on February 2, 2004. The new company owned all the ITV regions in England, Wales and the Scottish borders. The choice of the name ITV PLC was controversial, since it could imply that the company ran the entire network, and an agreement had to be reached with SMG, UTV and Channel before the name could be used. The day of the merger was marked by significant changes throughout the ITV PLC regions. All of the ITV PLC regional news programs received a new look in line with the national ITV news bulletins, and the regional company logos were replaced officially with an ITV logo followed by the company name below a These began to appear on production captions and as part of other branded output, such as weather summaries. As a result of the merger, ITV PLC was faced with a surplus of facilities it no longer needed. Studio and production facilities were replicated many times over, many of which were becoming costly to maintain due to age and difficult to justify following technological advancements. As a result, regional news moved into smaller offices and studio facilities were sold off. Anglia's separate studio facility was sold off as an independent studio, as was HTV's main studio in Cardiff. However, Tyne T's Newcastle Studios and Meridian's Southampton studio complex were closed completely and demolished, both broadcasters moving to smaller regional news bureau. The reduction in the size of the organisation and in the number of transmission centres resulted in a large number of job cuts. ITV plc reviewed its digital channel portfolio. In June 2002, Carlton and Granada jointly bought the ITN News channel from ITN, renaming it the ITV News channel 3 months later. In March 2003, the final Carlton-owned channel, Carlton Cinema, closed. The channel had been struggling ever since the failure of ITV Digital. Following the success of ITV2, compared to the Granada and Carlton branded channels, a further channel, ITV3, was launched on November 1, 2004. The channel replaced Granada Plus and aired archive programs, notably drama. On November 1, 2005, ITV plc launched another new channel aimed specifically at men, ITV4. This channel became notable for airing programs such as classic 1960s ITC entertainment series and alternative sports such as the British Touring Car Championship. The new channel featured a new-look ITV logo, which was officially rolled out across the network on January 9, 2006. The new look was more coherent than previous looks, and was also voluntarily adopted by Channel Television. 2006 also saw the launch of the CITV channel, which used the airspace previously used by the ITV News channel, which had closed down in December 2005, and of the participation television channel ITV Play, which turned out to be controversial and closed down the following year. ITV PLC began to look at high-definition television in June 2006, when it launched an experimental channel, ITV HD, primarily for airing the 2006 FIFA World Cup and classic films. ITV HD was launched as a permanent channel in June 2008, showing its own schedule of programs in HD acquired by ITV PLC. The channel rebranded as ITV1 HD in December 2009, before becoming a full simulcast of ITV1 on April 2, 2010. The launch of the simulcast service saw the end of the last Granada channel, Men and Motors, which was closed down on April 1, 2010 to make room for ITV1 HD on other platforms. On October 7, 2010, ITV PLC launched ITV2 HD, an HD simulcast of ITV2. Followed on November 15 by ITV3 HD and ITV4 HD. All three of these channels were initially only available on the Sky platform. In June 2005, Ofcom, the channel's regulator since the demise of the Independent Television Commission at the end of 2003, announced huge reductions in the license fees payable by the Channel 3 contractors. This move reflected the significant shift towards digital viewing in the UK, and the British government's desire to switch off analogue television signals altogether by 2012. License fees fell further as the shift to digital continued. Ofcom also significantly relaxed most of the remaining public service requirements on the ITV contractors. Regional non-news output was a significant casualty of these cutbacks, with most regions now broadcasting no more than 2 hours a week in this category. An experimental internet service, ITV Local, attempted to unite regional content through an online user experience that combined regional news, local programming and other features. ITV 50. In September 2005, the ITV Network celebrated its 50th anniversary with a season of ITV 50 programming that was run on the network, including a rundown of ITV's 50 top programs, a World of Sport retrospective, a 7-week game show marathon presented by Ant and Dec, the launch of an Avenue of the Stars, and most notably a 5-part documentary series made by Melvyn Bragg, which chronicled ITV's history. The Post Office issued special ITV 50 postage stamps. The regional companies owned by ITV PLC also aired special regional retrospectives, as well as using special ITV 50 station identification. While Scottish Television, Grampian Television, and UTV aired the network ITV 50 programming, they did not themselves air regional programs of this sort, nor did they use the special identification. ITN also celebrated its 50th anniversary with special features in its programming. 2006 to 2011, in March 2006 SMG plc announced that Scottish Television and Grampian Television were to be rebranded as STV, making Grampian the latest ITV region to lose its own regional identity. The STV brand, which works similarly to the ITV brand in England and Wales, had previously been used by Scottish Television from 1969 until 1985. In September 2007, the then chairman of ITV plc, Michael Grade, announced huge cost-cutting plans for the company which would see the number of regional news programmes cut from 17 to 9. These plans saw many mergers of news programmes, including the respective mergers of the programmes in the 2 remaining central sub-regions, the programmes in the 2 Anglia sub-regions and the programmes in the 2 Yorkshire sub-regions into one programme for each region. Most controversial, however, were the merger proposals which covered 2 regions. These included the respective mergers of the programmes in the West and West Country regions into one programme from Bristol, the programmes in the 2 Meridian sub-regions and the Thames Valley region into one programme from Whiteley, and the programmes in the 2 Tyne Tees sub-regions and the Border region into one programme from Gateshead. The new arrangement resulted in pre-recorded opt-out segments in the main programme for some regions where regional news was mandatory, such as Meridian South and South East. and where a program crossed regional boundaries, such as timetease and border. These changes took effect from February 2009, when Meridian began its pan-regional service. The plans also saw the end of the ITV Local Online initiative, as the regional cuts affected the service hard. The service closed down in March 2009. In November 2008 the operating licenses of all the ITV PLC regions were transferred to a new company, ITV Broadcasting Limited. This essentially leaves one company producing and broadcasting programmes to the ITV regions in England and Wales. In November 2009 ITV plc gained full control of the breakfast broadcaster, GMTV, when it bought the 25% stake of the Walt Disney Company for £18 million. ITV subsequently announced that GMTV would be closed and replaced with two new programmes in September 2010, Daybreak, a news and features programme, and Lorraine, named after presenter Lorraine Kelly and providing a platform for female debate. The official name of the company itself was changed to ITV Breakfast Limited. In the autumn of 2011 another step was taken towards the full unification of the ITV network when ITV plc bought Channel Television, 2013 rebranding. On November 15, 2012, an overhaul of the network was announced, which involved the rebranding of ITV1 back to ITV and the introduction of a new color-changing logo stylized as handwriting, the colors varying depending on the programming the logo was used on. The overhaul was linked to ITV's attempt to cut costs, curb debts and reduce the company's reliance on advertising. The new look was rolled out across all of ITV plc's channels and online services on January 14, 2013. ITV license renewal for 2015. According to The Guardian, ITV will increase regional news programmes in England and Wales from 9 back to 17 in the future. Culture Secretary Maria Miller suggested talks about the future of ITV regional news in the south of Scotland. A possible new ITV franchise for Wales could be introduced, which would replace the Wales and West of England franchise, currently awarded to ITV Wales and West. This is part of ITV's and Channel 5's franchise renewal for the next 10 years which will expire in 2024. List of former ITV franchise holders: ABC Weekend TV, North and Midlands Weekend Franchise, Associated Rediffusion, London Weekday Franchise, Associated Television ITV Network, Midlands Weekday Franchise and London Weekend Franchise. Midlands, Southern Television, South and South East England Franchise, Thames Television, London Weekday Franchise, TSW, SW England Franchise, TVS, South and South East England Franchise, TWW, Wales and West of England Franchise. See also TSWW, Westwood Television, SW England Franchise, WWN, North and West Wales Franchise, TVAM, National Breakfast Television Franchise, Oracle, National Teletext Franchise, Timeline, Slogans, Welcome Home, Get Ready, Television from the Heart, Britain's Favourite Button, The Brighter Side just got brighter. See also, ITV Emergency National Service, History of ITV Television Idents, Notes. The following notes apply to the 1991 franchise round. The quality threshold was a subjective evaluation by the ITC of the application submitted with the bid. The threshold worked in one direction: high bidders could be disqualified for not reaching it, but low bidders could not be promoted for having passed it. The ITC did not announce if the lower bidders had passed the threshold or not. CPV-TV was a consortium led by David Frost and Richard Branson. It bid for the East, London Weekday and South franchises, aiming to offer a centralised single service. The ITC at first considered disqualifying the Timetease bid, on business plan grounds. Northeast was backed financially by Granada Television. Northwest Television was a consortium led by Phil Redmond of the independent producer Mersey Television, and backed financially by Yorkshire Television and Timetease Television. The business plan test was a subjective evaluation by the ITC of the business plan submitted with each bid. The evaluation tested whether the bidder could afford its programme plans and also, more importantly, afford to pay the amount it had bid. The ITC did not announce if the lower bidders had passed the business plan evaluation. TVS sought a judicial review of this decision, but the High Court decided it could not look into the matter as the ITC had already awarded the contract to Meridian. TSW sought a judicial review of this decision. The ITC held off from awarding the contract to West Country until the High Court had ruled. After 4 months, the High Court ruled that the ITC had no case to answer, and ITC confirmed the award of the contract to West Country. The ITC at first considered disqualifying the HTV bid on business plan grounds. The ITC at first considered disqualifying the Yorkshire bid on business plan grounds. References: AB History of ITV PLC. ITV PLC. Retrieved December 11, 2011. Chillerton Down Transmitter. TheBigTower.com. Retrieved December 11, 2011. UHF and Colour. Photomusicians a Eurotransdiffusion broadcasting system. Retrieved December 11, 2011. Information gained from scanned image from the ITA Yearbook 1968. Tyne Tees TV official website, accessed June 12, 2006. ABCDE https, sites Google.com Bromfield Knit list of bids, http, www.watdathicno.com 1,182,572,897,582 firsts percent 20,210,536,725 PDF, ITC, quoted an encouraging bidding in the Single Licence National Lottery Framework Report, UK National Lottery Commission, November 19, 2004, Coward, Anne. On regional television. Bumblebee blogs. Steve Punter. Retrieved December 11, 2011. London Stock Exchange listing. London Stock Exchange. December 27, 2007. Archived from the original on November 28, 2007. Retrieved December 28, 2007. Wilkes, Neil. Mail skewed ITV4 to launch on November 1. Digital Spy. Retrieved November 30, 2012. ITV unveils new channel identities across its portfolio of channels. ITV PLC. Retrieved December 11, 2011. ITV can cut regional programming. BBC News September 25, 2008. Retrieved September 7, 2011. Anger over news merger acceptance. BBC News September 25, 2008. Retrieved September 7, 2011. Meridian faces axe. Salisbury Journal September 21, 2007. Retrieved September 7, 2011. ITV1 to become ITV in-channel rebrand. The Daily Telegraph. November 16, 2012. Retrieved November 16, 2012. ITV and Channel 5 may have to increase programming commitments services. The Guardian. November 21, 2012. Retrieved November 23, 2012. http, www.guardian.co.201218/ITV to get license renewal. Ofcom. September 18, 2012. Retrieved November 23, 2012. Allen, Richard. Davis, Hugh. The Decline and Fall of ITV's Chief News Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph. Retrieved April 29, 2007. Cherry, Simon ITV, The People's Channel Richmond, UK, Reynolds and Hinn Limited 2005, pp 204 €207, external links, ITV at 50, Independent Teal Web, Key Dates in the History of Commercial TV.